There is a sound that precedes catastrophe. Not an explosion. Not a crash. Just silence. The kind of silence that falls over a crowd of 20,000 people when they realize all at once, in the same terrifying instant, that what they are witnessing is not a performance. It is not a carefully rehearsed segment. It is not sports entertainment wrapping a predetermined outcome in dramatic packaging. It is two forces of nature, stripped of all pretense, standing chest to chest inside a wrestling ring at Madison Square Garden, and neither one of them, not one, is willing to blink first. That was Monday Night Raw. That was March 30th, 2026. And if you weren't watching, then you missed the night that Brock Lesnar's carefully constructed armor of invincibility began to show cracks, and the man swinging the hammer at those cracks was a 24-year-old Nigerian-born destroyer who goes by one name: Oba Femi, the Ruler. Welcome to Wrestling Impact. Buckle in, because tonight we're breaking down the most emotionally charged, physically electric, legitimately unpredictable segment in Raw's recent memory, the night Triple H himself had to walk down that entrance ramp, step into that ring, and physically plant himself between two mountains of muscle before the whole structure of WrestleMania 42 came crashing down 3 weeks too early. To understand the full weight of what happened inside Madison Square Garden, you have to go back. You have to rewind through the weeks of tension and trauma that built to this boiling point, because this story didn't begin on March 30th. It began at the Royal Rumble, in the cold and the chaos, where Brock Lesnar, a man who has redefined what physically imposing means in professional wrestling not once but across multiple decades, eliminated Oba Femi from the match. It was a moment that said everything about the established order. Brock doesn't just win. Brock erases you. He ends careers, ends momentum, ends dreams, and then stares down at the wreckage with those stone-cold blue eyes and dares the universe to send him something new to destroy. Oba Femi looked into those eyes and did not blink. That is what makes the story different. That is what separates the Oba Femi chapter from every other Brock Lesnar rivalry in recent years. Most men, veterans, champions, legends, have carried a certain energy into a Brock Lesnar feud. You can see it in the way they talk during promos. You can sense it in the space between their words. A kind of deference. A silent acknowledgement that no matter what the story calls for, somewhere in the back of their minds, they understand what Brock Lesnar actually is. They respect the monster even while they're supposed to be fighting it. Oba Femi has no such deference. None. Zero. And that, more than any powerbomb or any physical confrontation, is what has genuinely gotten inside Brock Lesnar's head. Because on March 16th, it happened. Brock came back to Raw. He had unfinished business with Seth Rollins and the Vision. The Beast was focused, dangerous, and locked in, and then, like a storm rolling in off the ocean that nobody saw coming, Oba Femi appeared. And what did Oba Femi do to the most feared man in professional wrestling? He hit him with the fall from grace. A pop-up powerbomb that has ended nights and shattered reputations throughout Oba's undefeated run on the main roster. He planted Brock Lesnar into that mat with a violence that the Garden crowd felt in their bones. And then, and this is the part that the wrestling world hasn't stopped talking about, Oba placed his foot on Brock Lesnar's chest. Not a pin. Not a cover. Just a statement. A symbol as old as combat itself. I was here. You were down. Remember this. The match was made. Brock Lesnar vs. Oba Femi at WrestleMania 42 in Las Vegas, Nevada, at Allegiant Stadium. 2 nights. April 18th and 19th. The Beast against the Ruler. A generational collision that the company had been quietly building toward without the wrestling world even realizing how much anticipation had been accumulating in the chambers of its collective heart. And then came March 30th. New York City. The world's most famous arena. And the night that changed everything. Paul Heyman walked out to that Raw stage with the quiet confidence of a man who has managed monsters for 3 decades. The special counsel. The advocate. The most eloquent voice that professional wrestling has ever produced when it comes to translating the language of violence into something approaching poetry. And he began to speak about Oba Femi the way a man speaks about something that frightens him, not with honesty, but with redirection. Heyman talked about how yes, Oba had caught Lesnar off guard. Yes, the fall from grace had landed. But tonight was different. Tonight, Brock Lesnar was not here to make an appearance. He was not here to cut a promo. He was here dressed to fight, coiled like a spring, and the invitation he extended to Oba Femi was not a polite one. Come down to this ring, Heyman said, and settle this right now. The Garden knew what was coming before the music even hit. You could feel it in the way the crowd shifted, that electricity, that low hum of collective anticipation that only happens when something genuinely unrehearsed seems possible. And then Adam Pearce came out. The Raw general manager, the man whose job it is to maintain order in the most disorderly place on television, tried to do the one thing that nobody in that building actually wanted him to do. He tried to stop it. Pierce brought security. He brought officials. He brought the entire institutional weight of WWE authority and placed it between Brock Lesnar and the entrance ramp. He told Lesnar to leave. He explained, with the pained expression of a man who knows he is right but hates being right, that they needed both men healthy for WrestleMania. That the match had to happen on the grandest stage, not on a random Monday in New York. That destroying each other 3 weeks early helped nobody, served nothing, and would rob the WWE universe of what could be the most physically spectacular match of the entire weekend. And then Oba Femi's music hit. The ruler walked out from the back with that unhurried gait that has become one of the most distinctive entrances in wrestling, not the explosive, kinetic energy of a performer who feeds on crowd noise, but the slow, deliberate movement of something that does not need validation from anyone in any building. Oba descended the ramp and looked at the ring full of security personnel and smiled the way a lion smiles at a fence. With absolute certainty that the fence means nothing. Security flooded the space between him and the ring. It didn't matter. Oba Femi walked through them, not around them, through them, scattering wrestlers and officials like they were made of paper. Every person Adam Pearce had placed in that ring as a barrier became a casualty within seconds. The garden erupted. Because this was the moment, the real moment, when the crowd understood that they were not watching a carefully controlled television segment. They were watching two immovable forces approach an inevitable collision, and the only question was whether the world could survive the impact. Oba stepped through the ropes. Brock Lesnar did not retreat. Not an inch. He stood his ground in the center of that ring with Paul Heyman somewhere behind him and looked at this 24-year-old who had knocked him down and put a foot on his chest, and every muscle in Brock's body said the same thing: I have been waiting for this. Come take what you think you can take. And then the music changed. Triple H's music, and with it, the weight of an entire institution filled Madison Square Garden. The chief content officer. The Game. The man who now runs the creative direction of the most watched wrestling company on the planet walked down that entrance ramp and stepped into a situation that most people in his position would have handled from a distance, from behind a desk, from the safety of corporate infrastructure. He stepped into the ring. He walked directly into the space between Brock Lesnar and Oba Femi, two men who between them could reduce professional athletics to rubble, and he stood there, not as a performer, as an authority. As the final voice that both men would have to acknowledge. The tension in that building was suffocating. The crowd went quiet, that specific kind of quiet that happens when people are holding their breath, because Triple H was standing between two wrecking balls, and the only thing preventing the most violent 3 weeks of WrestleMania build-up in recent memory was the force of his presence, his reputation, the understanding that when Triple H steps in, he steps in with the full gravity of everything he represents. Brock Lesnar stared at him, not with defiance, exactly. Something more complicated. Because Brock Lesnar and Triple H share a history that goes back further than most of the fans in that building can fully process, a history of war, of mutual destruction, of the kind of respect that only forms between two people who have genuinely pushed each other to the absolute edge. Brock looked at Triple H and understood, on some level, that this was not an obstacle. This was a message delivered by the one person whose message he might actually receive. He left. Slowly. Deliberately. Because leaving on his own terms is still leaving on his terms. But on his way out, Brock Lesnar, just to make sure that nobody in that building or watching at home misunderstood the temperature of his mood, grabbed the ring steps and sent them flying. And then, in one of the most jaw-dropping punctuation marks of this entire WrestleMania season, he grabbed a security guard and delivered an F5 right there on the floor. Because Brock Lesnar cannot exit a building without leaving damage in his wake. Because the Beast doesn't just walk out of rooms. He burns them on the way out. And then it was just Triple H and Oba Femi standing in that ring, the architect of modern WWE and the man who may well be its most physically gifted newcomer. And the room watched in genuine uncertainty, because nobody quite knew what the dynamic was going to look like. Oba Femi did not back down, did not show deference, did not perform the usual subordination that talent tends to display in the presence of authority. He stood there, enormous and completely still, and the message he radiated required no microphone, no promo, no words at all. I am here. I am ready. Nothing you do, nothing any person in authority over this industry does is going to change what happens when I finally get my hands on Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. Triple H has managed many things in his time overseeing this company. He has navigated title changes and returns and retirements and the 1,000 moving parts of a global entertainment enterprise. But what he stood across from in that ring at Madison Square Garden was not a superstar performing ambition. It was ambition in its raw, unfiltered, almost primal form. A young man who arrived on the main roster with an undefeated streak, who has dismantled everyone placed in front of him, who powerbombed Brock Lesnar and then stood on his chest and felt absolutely nothing about it, no fear, no hesitation, no weight of consequence. Just certainty. That is the most dangerous opponent in professional wrestling. Not the strongest. Not the most technically skilled. The most certain. And that certainty is what makes Brock Lesnar vs. Oba Femi at WrestleMania 42 the match that the entire wrestling world needs to see with its own eyes. Because for the first time in years, we are watching a Brock Lesnar storyline in which the outcome feels genuinely unknowable. Brock has walked into WrestleMania matches with the aura of inevitable destruction. He has been the Beast. The Conqueror. The nightmare that opponents spend months pretending not to fear. But something has shifted in the weeks since Oba Femi placed that foot on his chest. Something subtle and significant and deeply uncomfortable for the Beast. Brock Lesnar now knows what it feels like to be the one who was put down. And Oba Femi knows it too. Allegiant Stadium, Las Vegas, April 18th and 19th. The grandest stage in professional wrestling history will host what could be what should be a collision so physically spectacular, so psychologically charged, so layered with the weight of everything these two men have been building toward, that decades from now people will talk about where they were when they watched it. A 20-year veteran against a 24-year-old. The established monster against the inevitable future. The destroyer versus the man who has never once, in his entire career on the main roster, been stopped. Triple H knows it. He stepped into that ring not just to prevent a brawl but to protect something, to preserve the full detonation of this rivalry for the moment it was designed for. Because the moment Triple H stepped between those two men, he was not just managing a situation. He was making a promise to the WWE Universe that what you want, what you need, what you have been watching build week after week in Raw arenas across the country, you are going to get it. In full. In Las Vegas. With nothing held back and no authority figure close enough to intervene. 2 weeks from now, when the lights of Allegiant Stadium wash over 60,000 people in the Nevada desert, there will be no Triple H in the ring. No Adam Pearce with security. No institutional gravity keeping these men apart. Just Brock Lesnar and Oba Femi and the undeniable mathematics of violence. And the world will hold its breath that if this story has you locked in, if watching Oba Femi's relentless ascent and Brock Lesnar's rare, unsettling vulnerability has your mind running through every possible outcome for Las Vegas, then leave your prediction in the comments right now. Tell us who walks out of WrestleMania 42 with the victory. Tell us whether you think Brock Lesnar rediscovers the beast within, or whether the ruler finally plants his flag at the summit of the mountain he's been climbing since December. This conversation deserves to happen, and Wrestling Impact is the place to have it. Drop a like if this breakdown hit different, subscribe if you're riding with us every single week, and we will see you on the other side of the most anticipated WrestleMania weekend in recent memory.